welcome. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Tony.
I'm glad to be here, Rob.
You know, as we watch what we just see here on the screen, it reminds me of, I spent about 10 days, I think it was, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And I remember one of the Saudi Arabian drivers taking us around Jeddah at one point. And a gentleman who was in the car with us asked the driver, he said, you know, I'm looking at everybody and they are walking so slow. Why does everybody walk so slow here? And the guy turned around and said, because it's 122 degrees. You don't move but so fast at 122 degrees. So doing what you were doing there under that kind of heat was indeed quite a feat. I want to ask you, you know, before we talk about your journey this time around and you're going back and your visit to Sudan, I'd like for you to clear up something.
Sure.
I have a nephew who's a brilliant young kid, 17 years old, and he's very much into design. He just mentioned to my wife how he was studying Greek history. And he said because they were the originators of the design and some of the patterns that they were using. I want to be able to copy them. And he said it, you know, just innocently as could be. And I looked at her and she looked at me and I winked and said, don't say anything. So she asked me, she said, why didn't you want to correct him? And I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have him to watch tonight's show. So if you might speak, because I'm sure you can do it a lot better than I can, if you might speak to that young brother where he talks about Greek civilization, advancing civilization, and the originators of these kind of designs. Tony Browder, who's been to Egypt 52 times, would say what?
Well, I would say that 30 some odd years ago, I was that young man. I came to Howard in 1971. I majored in design, and I believed that the Greeks and the Romans were the masters of everything that we hold near and dear. It wasn't until 1977 when I met Dr. Ivan Van Sertima and heard him talk about his book that came before Columbus, The African Presence in America, in which he documented that Africans from the Nile Valley had traveled across the Atlantic Ocean and came to the Americas 2,500 years before Christopher Columbus was born. And he said that those Egyptians were black. That was my first time ever hearing any reference to the Egyptians being black. And that's when I realized that I had been miseducated, like most people in this country and around the world have been miseducated. We don't know of the great accomplishments of people of African ancestry within the Nile Valley and throughout the continent itself. So one of the reasons why I travel to Egypt so often is that the documentation is still there. We are literally digging it up, and you're providing me with the perfect opportunity to share my knowledge with the world.
And to the extent that, if you could just speak for a moment on what Greek civilization got from those ancient Egyptians.
Well, most of what we know about Egypt is viewed through Greek and Roman eyes. Egypt is a Greek word. Sphinx is a Greek word. Pyramid is a Greek word. So until we can begin to interpret this indigenous African culture and civilization through an African lens, then we will always view them from a disadvantage. So the Greeks traveled to Egypt and said that the Egyptians were the faultless people. They said that they were the greatest people on earth, the most beautiful people on earth. They went to Egypt. The Greek mathematicians went to Egypt to study mathematics. Pythagoras spent 23 years studying math in Egypt. The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was used in Kemit to build the pyramid at least 2,000 years before Pythagoras was born. Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, acknowledges Imhotep as the father of medicine. Imhotep was the designer of the step pyramid at Saqqara. The columns that are referred to as Greek columns, you can find them at Saqqara. So the elements of Greek design, Roman design, Greek philosophy, all had their beginnings in ancient Kemit or Egypt.
Nephew.
Listen and learn. There's a lot to learn. And see, he's been miseducated, as we all have been. And so the best thing we can do to neutralize miseducation or ignorance is to read, to study, learn, and grow. And as we learn, our minds are transformed.
And so, Tony, on your last visit, just this summer,